three panels of sort. Mr. Bronson from Digital Gaming, if you would take a seat in this first row. And if Martin, Haran, and Mark, I saw Martin, in fact, you got, and Roger, if the three of you would take the three seats back there. And we're just getting queued up. We're probably going to start in just a second. But we'll start with Mr. Bronson, and then we'll go to the three gentlemen behind you, and then what we'll do is we'll take the next five people as a group, and we'll move from there. Let me announce as well, we're moving forward because we're informational, and so I'm not having to establish a quorum because we're not voting on anything specifically. Many of you know that we had an emergency Democratic caucus called, but because I had so many people who had traveled from so far, it was a little bit cumbersome to try to cancel the hearing, and we're trying to work on a time space to get all of these issues sorted out. So I appreciate the people who are able to come. We're still joined by the staff from both sides of the aisle. Again, the objective here today is largely educational, and we'll pretty much keep to the same format. So, ladies and gentlemen, today what we're discussing is the business model, the bidding, selection, and contract oversight process. And I remember the gentleman who was here last week had some concerns about, I believe he was talking about bid selection. Is that gentleman's, I forgot his name, but I saw him outside. Okay, I'm sure he'll be back. Oh, that's you way in the back. I can see you, sir, with the beard. I don't remember your name, but great. Yeah, no, that's right. But when we get to the public comment period, Mr. Owens, we're going to take the question that you had. And I probably might want to do it after this panel because some of the issues you raised were regulatory in nature, and the regulatory people are here today, so don't go too far away. With that, we're going to get started. Again, let me welcome everyone here. This is a GO Committee informational hearing. Our concern becomes the issues of Internet poker. Those of you who've been following, I think this is now our fourth session, three separate meetings, but we combined one a couple of weeks ago. So this is our fourth session, and we run through. Our first speaker today is going to be Skip Bronson, the chairman of U.S. Digital Gaming. And we're, again, talking today about business model, bidding, selection, contract oversight. Mr. Bronson, thank you for coming from Beverly Hills. Sorry we gave you bad weather, but they tell me it was a little bit overcast and chilly at home today, too. So, welcome aboard.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Senator. I'm Richard Bronson, chairman of U.S. Digital Gaming. We're a Beverly Hills-based gaming technology company. I've been in the gaming industry for approximately 20 years. And 2 years ago, my colleagues and I saw a new phase in the gaming industry. Certainly the gaming industry, if you look at it as a three-act play, the first act was the creation of resort casinos that started in Nevada, went to New Jersey, and now, of course, has spread throughout the United States. The second act would be Asia, Macau, Singapore, Vietnam, perhaps Japan at one point. And the third, and we believe final act, is online, the internet. And it's a rather fascinating space, and I have a few observations that I'd like to share with you, and then I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. We believe that legalized, regulated online gaming in the United States is inevitable. If you read the front page of today's Wall Street Journal, there's a feature story about the fact that states throughout the country are looking at this. There are a number of states that are pursuing it with great energy. There's legislation pending in Florida, in Iowa, New Jersey, And I think a very interesting fact is that today in the United States, more people will complete an illegal online gaming transaction than will complete an ATM transaction. It's an extraordinary business. At United States Digital Gaming, we projected that over 10 years, legally compliant internet poker only, not other games, in California would generate a profit to the state of more than $5 billion in new state revenues. We also believe that online gaming must be held under a bright light of public scrutiny. This is not a subject to be discussed in a back room, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I commend you for holding these hearings.
The light isn't real bright, but it is a light nonetheless. So
that's good to know. Up until now, the story of online gaming in the United States has been dominated by what I would call a posse of offshore felons who've been breaking U.S. law with impunity. When Americans gamble today, they are breaking the law, and so are the companies. It's interesting that a lot of these offshore companies that are based in Aruba, Curacao, all the places that you've read about, they have .net sites where they encourage people to come and play for free, learn how to play poker, have fun. It's great. And then from there, they try to induce you to move to their .com sites, which are for-money sites. At the moment that you insert or provide your credit card information, they're breaking the law and you're breaking the law. But so many people are doing it today that the numbers are truly astonishing. Currently, there's more than a $6 billion illegal market in the United States. And we know from past experience that number will double once it becomes legal. There is a significant part of the population that doesn't want to break the law. There are people that are afraid to put their credit card into a system where they don't know who's on the other end, they don't know about collecting, and the overall probity is very disconcerting. We believe that in California, certainly any gaming operator needs to be squeaky clean, law-abiding, tax-paying, and beyond reproach. But it's also interesting that some of these vigilantes and tax evaders want to operate internet gaming in California. This is something that we are very much opposed to. Online gaming, if done properly, can be the safest, best regulated form of legalized gambling available to this state and its citizens. Extraordinary technological advances that far eclipse the fake ID and fake mustache in the bricks and mortar settings. Our system has built-in geolocating, fraud analysis, age verification. We can track and prosecute any form of abuse or misuse in a faster and more thorough way through technology. And lastly, I would point out that online gaming, we believe, must be inclusive to the existing stakeholders while expanding the state revenue opportunities. We believe the existing card room operators, racetrack owners, and Indian casinos should, in fact, be the operators of the system. So we've been working on this for about 2 years. We've invested millions in building the technology and the regulatory infrastructure. We welcome the potential, but also view it with the caution of a stakeholder that knows we only have one chance to do this right, do it lawfully, and to do it with the best interests of California in mind. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, don't leave. What I'm going to do is go right to the back, and why don't I start, and I apologize because I forgot the people by name. Roger, why don't I start on this side with Martin?
All right. Thank you, Senator. My name is Mark LaForest. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs at the Department of Justice. And I just wanted to set the stage a little bit by saying that we view our role in this, in the consideration of this legislation as being somewhat limited. I don't foresee that we're going to take a position on either of the pending bills or really describe whether this is good policy or not. But what we do want to do is make sure that to the extent the legislature is going to have the Department of Justice take a regulatory role in this venture, we want to ensure that to the extent that we can, that the department will have the resources, the expertise, and the time to fulfill the regulatory role that you envision. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marty Horan, who is the acting chief of the Bureau of Gambling Control within the department. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I would like to share some general views regarding the proposed regulation of intrastate internet gambling from the perspective of the Bureau of Gambling Control. However, I would first like to provide some background information on the Bureau. Our mission is to ensure the integrity of gambling in California. In general, the Bureau is responsible for the following: investigating the qualifications of applicants, monitoring the conduct of all licensees and other persons having a material involvement directly or indirectly with the gambling operation for the purpose of ensuring that licensees are not ineligible, unqualified, disqualified, or unsuitable persons, or persons whose operations are conducted in a manner that is inimical to the public health, safety, or welfare, and investigating criminal activity and regulatory compliance associated with licensed gambling establishments. The Bureau is currently responsible for the regulatory oversight, compliance, and enforcement of 91 licensed card rooms and 62 tribal casinos throughout the state. This endeavor is undertaken by 167 Bureau employees, 47 of whom are peace officers. The Bureau is significantly underfunded and understaffed to fully meet its mandated regulatory responsibilities. It is supported by special funds consisting of the Special Distribution Fund for Tribal Casino Regulation and the Gambling Control Fund for Licensed Card Room Regulation. Due to the California budget crisis and the ailing general fund, some special funds allocated for gambling regulation have been diverted, further jeopardizing the solvency of these funds. The Bureau has been reviewing and monitoring intrastate internet gambling legislation and attending legislative committee hearings and workshop discussions. As its representative, I am not here today to address the specific bills, but rather to provide general input on what elements should be considered for any internet gambling legislation. To best ensure such legislation provides a clear framework for effective regulations, we would suggest that the following elements be clearly addressed. The draft legislation should be sufficiently detailed and specific with respect to regulatory requirements, including a clear indication of responsible state agencies and the specific funding sources and safeguards for both program implementation and ongoing operations. To the extent appropriate, the legislation might incorporate applicable provisions of the Gambling Control Act for terminology, definitions, and licensing requirements with such specificity that regulations are only needed to provide additional clarification, structure, and guidance. It would be helpful if definitions in the legislation are aligned with terminology commonly used in the gaming industry. For purposes of determining resource requirements, it is important that the legislation provide a clear basis on which to quantify projected workload, particularly involving the labor-intensive suitability investigations of involved businesses and individuals. Legislative provisions will have bearing on the time frame for suitability investigations, especially the degree to which they impose certain requirements on the applicant, such as providing financial reports from independent CPA firms and showing proof of financial solvency in the form of a surety bond. The legislation should also be clear in terms of the authorized games and system requirements. It is important that the legislation factors in a realistic time frame for program implementation as it involves the Bureau's regulatory functions. Based on preliminary analysis, including many assumptions that we cannot validate at this point, the total estimated time frame for program implementation could be anywhere from 18 to 24 months. This implementation must take into account various time-consuming tasks such as securing funding, staff resources and facilities, and developing and adopting system standards and regulations. I should also mention that one major variable are our ability to recruit investigative auditors, which are essential to our investigations. Due to salary disparities with private industry, the Bureau historically has had limited success in its recruitment efforts for these positions. Should such legislation be adopted, the Bureau certainly recognizes the importance of expediting the development and implementation of its mandated regulatory functions. To best ensure this is an efficient and effective process, we would hope that legislation would be very clear with respect to all key aspects of the regulation of Internet gaming. The indicated timeline is strictly an estimate of the anticipated workload demands, given the numerous variables and uncertainties possibly associated with the number of applicants, type of applicants, where they are located, the size and structure of the applicant, the number of employees associated with the applicant, etc. The Bureau is open to further discussions on this subject and appreciates the opportunity to comment regarding our preliminary concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move right to Mr. Hornbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. It's an honor to be able to testify today regarding Internet gambling. My name is Roger Horbe. I'm the Chief Intelligence Officer of Black Edge Technologies. Black Edge is focused on giving governments and regulators such as the Bureau the tools to centrally manage their Internet gambling markets through powerful new technologies. Today I did have a PowerPoint presentation made up, but unfortunately we cannot project it, but I have provided color copies for the chair and committee members, so at times I will be referring to these. Oh, they are handed up. Thank you. Today I would like to examine how California can license and manage your Internet gambling market better than anyone else in the world. This is good news for you, your constituents, the state of California, and lawful Internet gambling licensees, regardless of which business model you choose. Today, California has the opportunity to learn from others' mistakes in other jurisdictions who are attempting to control their Internet gambling market and who are struggling and maybe failing. The bills before you are an opportunity to get it right and be the model for the U.S. and the world. I want you to know that technology exists today that will allow you to take complete control over your Internet gambling market. So some emergent technologies are ready to go today to control your market. Technology that gives the entire market of California back to California to manage the way you see fit. That will bring in additional revenues to the state in well over $300 million, we estimate. This technology will capture the vast majority of gaming revenues that are now flowing out of the state without concessions, without apologies, that include billions of dollars that are now flowing out of the California market. Instead of reading through my presentation, I'm aware of the time frame, and I would just like to refer to some of the slides, and just to make it easier or quicker, because I'm aware that there's a lot of people behind me. I'd like to refer to slide 2 on the front page of the handout. One of the major points I wanted to make is iGaming already exists in California, and we estimate there's well over $2 billion bleeding now out of the California economy. And I did up a little pie chart so you can see some of the players involved. Players such as Full Tilt, Poker Stars, sports books, casinos, and others are draining a lot out of California now. And I think it's an urgent matter to deal with that issue today. This economic bleed is really harming your economy, cannibalizing your tribal casinos, card rooms, bingos, and lotteries, shutting California out from enforcing its gaming standards, player protections, policies, taxations for the public benefit. Where is all this money going? It's going basically to unauthorized private interests. And it's kind of interesting when you look at the distribution of where the money's going and the players involved, some of those players actually have servers in California. The next slide, slide 3, I put the question up, what can the state do? I think it's important that the state exerts its rights over internet gambling. The state has the constitutional right to control gambling within your borders. I also think it's important that you choose not to compete with illegal operators. So whatever regime you set up for regulations and licensing, that those operators are not put in the awkward position of competing with illegal operators, which is the case in many other jurisdictions, especially in Europe, and I'll touch on that in a minute. I think it's important that you aim at capturing the entire internet gambling market in California and bringing it back for the benefits of California. And you really need to establish full control over the market. I think the stakes are too high to settle for less. That you can do, the technology exists for total market management today, and you shouldn't compromise. The next chart, which might be difficult to read on slide 4, basically outlines various approaches or options you may have to deal with internet gambling market access management in California. Traditionally, law enforcement efforts have been fairly, I'm not going to say useless, but limited, in that they don't make much of a difference for unauthorized operators accessing your market. This continuum, I'll jump to the next slide just to save time. There's basically 4 ways of trying to control your internet gambling market. One is through law enforcement efforts, such as forfeiture, seizures, prosecutions. In these slides, I estimated the California market as initially starting at $2 billion. So the breakdown of revenues is reflective of that amount. If these approaches were applied to your market today, these are the estimates that we think would be fairly accurate. As you can see from the top chart on slide 5, law enforcement efforts put barely a dent into unauthorized access to your market, which means 96% of players would still be unprotected. The bulk of the $2 billion revenues would go to unauthorized operators, with some revenue going to licensed operators and public benefit, but very little. If you considered using financial transaction blocking that jurisdictions in Europe are using, such as Italy and France, if the market was worth $2 billion, that type of technology would also only put a slight dent into controlling the market. Financial transaction blocking under the Unlawful Internet Gaming Enforcement Act here in the U.S. has been basically almost useless. And in Norway, recently, a study that was put out last week from Norway, who have also introduced financial transaction blocking, shows that the number of people accessing unauthorized sites prior to them attempting financial transaction blocking is actually the same now that they've put it in. So it has done little to stop illegal access to your markets. Also, European states are attempting to do what's termed as IP list filtering or blocking, where the regulators are tasked with compiling a blacklist of the illegal sites, then telling the internet service providers or the telecommunication carriers to block this blacklist. That has had some success, but it still leaves, in our estimates, more than half the market open to unauthorized operators. This type of blocking or filtering is very limited in that it's easily circumvented by the unauthorized operators, and that they can change an IP address in the blink of an eye, and these are manual lists that are sent to the ISPs. The other thing about IP list blocking is that it abdicates the state's authority to be in control of what it's doing to try to manage its market. It's given that authority to a third party, being internet service providers and telecommunication carriers, who do not want that authority and who will push back. The bottom slide, slide 8, really illustrates what newer technology can do. Edge definition is really central market access management technology that's capable of, we estimate, contained in the market initially at 84%. So 84% of the market would be contained almost immediately, moving on up as we secure the market up to roughly 96, 97%. As you can see from the slide at the top to the slide at the bottom, the one at the bottom really gives you your only option. On the next page, at the top of slide 9, that just shows you a comparison between the different approaches. As you can see, the bottom right one is really the only option if you want to succeed in containing your internet gambling market. So how does this technology work? Edge definition stops unauthorized internet gambling operators from accessing your market. We are not geolocation. We do not work with the operators. We provide a service to the regulator to stop the unauthorized access into your market. It's Central Internet Gambling Access Management System. It's really a statewide internet filtering system. It would be integrated in black box across all ISPs and telecommunication carriers in the state. It's very precise. It's centralized under the total control of the gaming authority within the state, so that the ISPs and the telecommunication providers are not being deputized to enforce whichever gambling law you decide upon. It would be the state and the Department of Justice acting to enforce the law directly. This technology is proven in massive installations around the world. The core technology is proven with over 1 million end users. And the core technology is in systems such as enterprise systems, government internet networks, internet service provider networks. It's also being installed on countrywide bases in various countries around the world, including the Middle East and other areas of the world, for lawful filtering of internet traffic. Right now, we have over 3.8 billion URLs cataloged, adding 15 million per day. So the system exists, and what we're doing with this system is we've redefined it or re-engineered it to be specific for internet gambling filtering only. It cannot filter anything else out except internet gambling within a jurisdiction. So we cannot accidentally or inadvertently block any legitimate content on the internet. And it also has a proven system uptime performance standard of 99.999%. So it won't interfere with a telco's operation, and we can satisfy them on any concerns they may have. So getting to what we think the bill needs, any bill that you may want to pass needs, we think it needs to contain provisions to allow the Department of Justice to control access to your internet gambling markets. We think the bill needs to make it clear that a telecommunications carrier has a duty to cooperate with the DOJ in the enforcement of the bill. We also believe that the bill needs to be clear around the wording of gambling and where the gambling is occurring, and that so that the DOJ has clear authority over that the gambling is occurring in California and not at an offshore server. There's a lot of people who would like you to think that the gambling is occurring offshore, when that's not how technology works. The gambling occurs where the player is located on their PC. They're not magically being teletransported offshore to a faraway land. Anyways, the wording of the bill needs to reflect that reality. In conclusion, California can be the market for the world. We believe internet gambling, like the gentleman before me, can be the safest form of gambling. We have the technology to do it. We believe we can turn the existing $2 billion market back towards California for California benefits. And we believe California gambling we can ensure California gambling standards and protections are under your control, not ignored, and that you can set a new world standard for smart iGaming management. And I'm open for questions later.
Let me do this. This gentleman had a question last week. Would you take this microphone right here? Uh-huh.
Okay.
And just, there were some regulatory questions, and you guys weren't here a couple of weeks ago, so you're up, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Martin Owens. I'm an attorney here in Sacramento. I specialize in internet and interactive gaming. And
for something not to be legal, there sure are a whole lot of people who do this. But okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm just.
We're here to help. Okay. Now, the question I had actually arose out of the idea of liquidity and the access to the entire available market. Although now it seems to be over in the regulatory and technical side. And the question I just wanted to ask is, does anybody think it would be a good idea to insist on, however many operators are finally admitted, to have at least some commonality in their architecture and or software so that we create, in effect, a California mall? If they don't go to one store, they can at least stay in the place.
Let me pose that back to DOJ.
I'm definitely not an expert at all in that area. It may be beneficial for review and approval of the actual sites themselves, the types of games, and so forth. But that would be yet to be seen. I think we'd have to understand better what the framework is that he's talking about, and still have a better understanding of the number of applicants that would be applying and so forth.
One more thought, and I'm not a technology expert by any means either, but if a common architecture means that there is a narrower expertise required within DOJ's regulatory structure, either through contract or through employment, then that's probably going to reduce the cost of regulation. And that would be the perspective that we would be looking at it from. But ultimately, it's the legislature's decision as to whether that would be the model that would be appropriate. But it seems to me that if you're talking about one common system as opposed to a variety of systems that don't communicate adequately with each other, that's obviously going to have some effect on the regulatory costs.
I don't know, Mr. Bronson, if you had a thought on this subject or.
Yeah, liquidity is a very important issue. Actually, you have to have at least 70,000 players playing online at any given time, or people will have to wait to get onto a game, and they don't want to wait. A simple solution that might incorporate one of the earlier suggestions was that the state of California could, in essence, run a hub, have that. Let the state be the cog in the wheel. The state could go out, run an RFP, decide who the hub operator was going to be, and the card room operators, the Indian tribes, and the racetrack owners could all be the spokes to this wheel. So that you've got this hub as the cog of the wheel, and then these various spokes, they could all have their own face, if you will, their own brand to try to get customers to play on their site. But there should be, in fact, one central system.
Okay, that's a thought. I'm not sure that we got all the answer that you needed, but
that's exactly what I wanted to get at.
Okay, all right. I'm going to go back. We've discussed it. You weren't here last week. A lot of the offshore sites, I shouldn't say a lot. There are effectively two of them. May or may not use a credit card. So the part of the discussion that we had last week was if a person uses, say, a check versus a credit card, that the Wire Act and other things make illegal the credit card, but don't necessarily make illegal unless the state specifies that it's illegal. So it was kind of sort of left as an open question here last week as to whether or not the games currently being played are unethical or illegal. I mean, they would be one or the other, but the legality, I'm not sure that we ever got a hard definition on in that respect. So I know there was mention of legality, but sometimes people may not. I mean, Visa and MasterCard, pursuant to the Wire Act, have a prohibition against using their card with a code that would register gaming. Mm-hmm. But people may not use Visa or MasterCard when they're playing, so that might not make it illegal. So the question of them being illegal was kind of sort of up in the air. We didn't resolve that last week.
Well, in an intrastate system that stays within the state, right, a person who wants to play online poker, and that's the only game that we believe, it's the only game that we're advocating at this time. Mm-hmm. There might be additional casino games down the line, and who knows where this goes with sports betting. There's currently a federal prohibition on sports betting except in the state of Nevada. But within...
It's actually 3 states, but we won't...
Right, well, you're right. It depends on your interpretation. Delaware would argue that. You're right.
They're specifically mentioned in the law, and there's 2, I think, Rhode Island, and I think Oregon is the other one.
But in an intrastate system, Senator, here in California, you would in essence get a license to play poker. You would have to register. We would know everything about you. We would know exactly who you are, and you would have a license to play. You would be a registered player.
And we would go the next step here. We would actually, in language that we got from our own lawyers, we would specifically make it illegal to play outside. So we would take the step that the state of Washington did. But what I was commenting about is that the people who are playing today, absent there being a state statute precluding you from doing that or specifically making it illegal, it's not clear that if you don't use your credit card, and Visa and MasterCard have responsibility to ensure that that doesn't occur, it's not clear that it's illegal. I mean, there have been 2 decisions that both ruled against the United States relative to legality of the play. Well, unless we make it illegal, then we're covered.
Well, there are a lot of gray areas when it comes to gaming. Fantasy sports is a gray area. There's a lot of fantasy football with prizes. People would argue whether that's legal or illegal. You are not allowed in the state of California to buy lottery tickets online. However, if you go to the internet and you type into the Google search box, there are companies where you can, in fact, pick your numbers, and you can buy lottery tickets online in the state of California using a Visa, MasterCard, or American Express. One of the sites is called Lotto Gopher, just as an example. You know, there are a lot of things that are taking place within the state of California where, to come back to my initial point, the state is getting no tax benefit, and these activities are not regulated. You have a real opportunity to get rid of all of this illegal activity, to be sure that this is in fact regulated and the state does receive what it is supposed to receive. But if you look at all the various forms of online gaming, put that in quotes, and as I said earlier, fantasy football and others, you know, there is a tremendous amount of activity that's taking place. So this is a great opportunity for the state to step up, take a leadership role, and say, we're not going to put up with this, and we're going to make sure that this is done in a totally legal, lawful, honorable manner.
I'm going to go back okay. Roger, when you were mentioning, to make clear, about a telecommunications carrier, I'm not sure that our authority allows us to necessarily regulate many of the telecommunications carriers. Much of what they do is regulated by the FCC. Okay. And, for example, their long-distance telephone service is an FCC-regulated issue. We have some interplay as it relates to their billing and some of the cost structures, but most of that's regulated by the FCC and not the PUC. So I'm not sure that Justice would have the authority to provide regulations to the telecommunications company.
Well, you wouldn't provide regulations to them. They wouldn't be operating the system. You would be asking them for their cooperation in the Department of Justice enforcing the law. You do have regulatory control over all aspects of gambling within the state. Internet gambling is just gambling.
But the problem is that while we could control the gambling, I mean, there were recent decisions, and I don't remember all of the specifics, but the federal government, on some other issues that weren't related to gaming, just got their hat handed to them by trying to dictate the kinds of things that a telecommunications operator can do. And that was the federal government, with the control of the FCC, had their hat handed to them. So I'm not sure that I could mandate that Verizon or AT&T, they might agree to cooperate, but I'm not sure that I could mandate that they specifically do something put something on their telephone system, is what I'm saying. I'm not sure how you enforce what you have.
It's not that you put it on their telephone system. They're cooperating with the regulator. In the same way they cooperate with enforcement officials on other matters, such as a wiretap or what have you.
Yeah, but in order to get a wiretap, for example, you have to go get a court order. Okay. And I mean, there ain't a court that's going to allow, in effect, a wiretap of all of the telephones or in a telecommunication system in California. So I'm not sure how we could enforce it. And but for the court order, the phone company won't do the wiretap. Okay. So you're still back at how does the guy at Justice order AT&T or Verizon or Sprint or whomever to cooperate in a system. And I got to tell you, having dealt in the utility business, they would not do it voluntarily. So you would have to have a statutory requirement that forced them to do it. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. I mean, I've seen that. I mean, I've had experience with them at that. They don't do that because it also subjects them to lawsuits if something goes sideways.
If you look at the alternative to trying to figure out the legal process that you're doing now,
right?
I don't think there is an alternative. That you need to go down the road now of exploring these options in the legal process and what you can do.
But that's what I'm doing with you. Yeah. I'm saying you propose something, and I'm telling you that I can't make Verizon cooperate if they choose not to. If Verizon says, I ain't putting this on my phone system, I don't know that Justice can say you will or else you won't be a phone company in California. I'm just saying, I mean, I'm not sure the enforcement mechanism that we could use that would require, whether it be an ILEC or a CLEC, an incumbent local exchange carrier or a competitive local exchange carrier. I'm not sure what authority I have as the California legislature to require that they do something.
Well, I think it's important to explore what authority you may need. Right. And I'm not the authority on the California legislature or laws. Right. What I'm presenting today is that we have the technology that can do this, and that it's up to California and you to explore how it can be actually implemented. Because the alternative is that you're gonna set up a regulatory and a licensing regime of some sorts. Mm-hmm. You're gonna, if you can't use our system, you certainly probably can't use IP blocking, where you send the telcos a list and tell them to block certain sites, right? Mm-hmm. So you're left with financial transaction blocking and some law enforcement efforts, which are almost useless. So your market's going to be wide open to poaching from whoever wants to come in still, and it's going to be a disaster. Even in Europe, where they're doing things like IP list blocking, mm-hmm. they're still struggling, because what happens after legalization of internet gambling is that the market explodes. Mm-hmm. Like, it'll double within 2 years here in California, so it'll jump from 2 billion to 4 billion or whatever. But what will also double or triple is the access to the unauthorized operators. They're learning in France, where they've licensed over 36 internet gambling operators, that the players didn't migrate from the illegal sites to the legal sites or the licensed sites in droves like they thought they would. They migrated in small numbers. And what they're finding too is that the new players that they call the novice or naive players, for every three new players going to a internet gambling site, 2 are going to the unauthorized sites. So they're actually inadvertently stimulating business for the unauthorized operators. And that's becoming intolerable over there, where the operators are not getting, who are paying the license or paying taxes, are kind of revolting behind the scenes with the regulators saying, you need to enforce the laws. You need to stop these unauthorized operators. Because, the market has grown and we're not getting our fair share for our license values.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, you do have a precedent here, and that is there is a legal form of online gambling taking place in California right now on a daily basis, horse racing,
right?
So-called ADWs, Advanced Deposit Wagers.
So I can go home. Next panel.
Yeah, so I can go home this afternoon and I can go to my TVG or ExpressBet or TwinSpires account. I can legally wager. I can watch it on television live, and that is a system that is regulated, it is taxed, it works. You would basically apply the same principles to online poker. We already know that it exists. We know that the market is there. We have empirical evidence as to how many people are currently wagering online, playing poker illegally in the state of California. So it's not like we're having a conversation and saying, well, how do we know people are going to want to play poker? We already know how many people are playing poker. We don't have to have a conversation about how do we know that we can regulate it and tax it, because through the existing ADWs, through the horse racing betting system, we know that we can regulate it and know that we can tax it. So we have an excellent precedent here in the state of California in a terrific way for the state to generate all the money that these criminals are now taking out of the state illegally.
Right. Well, again, I'm always sensitive to whether they're criminals or not is kind of sort of a debate we had last week. And clearly the objective would be, by making it illegal, we would give our Justice Department the authority to pursue people. I don't have hard numbers, but in the discussions that I've had with some of the European people is that they have pursued the countries where the offshore sites were regulated with the statute that they had and sought assistance from them in terms of slowing the business. Has it slowed it all down? No, because some do, some won't. Certainly the larger guys initially understanding, and this is anecdotal because I wasn't there to actually monitor it, but that a Tilt and Stars did withdraw when they were requested to. Our information is that in the state of Washington, for example, where it was made illegal, that there's been a significant reduction in play because the state made it illegal and they sought to pursue that. But in those instances, those companies where there was ambiguity as to whether or not it was illegal, then they would operate. But where it was specifically deemed to be illegal, they were less likely to want to come in and try to continue playing.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I've been speaking to Washington State as well and their gambling commission. And I think as of a couple of weeks ago, you're correct, 166 internet gambling operators have voluntarily stopped taking wagers from Washington State. But it hasn't stopped the underlying problem, which is unauthorized access. Because what happens is when one operator pulls out, another operator just fills the void. And they're seeing no reduction in unauthorized access to their state. They're just seeing different players moving around. Sure, it's great that they're seizing funds, and that money's coming into the state, and some of the operators are pulling out like Tilt and Poker Stars, but there's thousands of other ones to fill the void immediately. Getting back to the legality of forcing telcos to cooperate, I'm aware, I would have to pull it out, but I'm aware under the Unlawful Internet Gaming Enforcement Act that there are provisions in that act that allows the attorney generals of each state or appropriate state authorities to proceed with civil actions to, I think it's termed, disable illegal gambling websites. So there is a federal law there already that could possibly be used to compel the telcos to cooperate.
Well, but again, if you identify the site and you go after the operator specifically, that's something different from trying to place a filter over an entire telecommunications network.
It's not. It's not. It works in parallel with the network. The way the technology works is we see all the internet traffic going through, and if an unauthorized operator is trying to communicate or provide gambling services within the state that are not authorized, we don't allow that communication to happen.
Yeah, but see the difficulty becomes, I mean, and again, I mean, we've been around this, is granting you access as a third-party operator, even if you're acting on behalf of the Justice Department, to review internet traffic to make the determination that something is going through that is questionable. I'm not sure that it becomes a question we'll have to check, and I mean, because I come from a utility side, I mean, there are a few places, but my guess is that you ain't doing that in the United States. You're just not going to get anyone to let you monitor the traffic over a common carrier line. I just don't think that that's going to happen.
Okay. The other thing to take into consideration is I think Washington State's law is very clear around knowingly transmitting gambling information is a crime, and that the telcos are involved in that now, and that they don't want to. I think some sort of process needs to be set up, maybe between the Department of Justice and telecommunications providers and your Department of Justice legal to find out, is there a solution that is palatable to the telecommunication carriers at this point? Because again, I see the alternative as being worse. That the market's going to explode. And for me, my background actually is from years ago as an addiction therapist, problem gambling counselor, trainer, researcher. And I know without the proper market access controls, the majority of the players will not be protected.
Okay. Well, no, we got that. I mean, yeah. we're clear there, and we're clear of the objective. I mean, we pretty much resigned ourselves that the object of the exercise for an intrastate game would be to essentially claw back the players who are already playing initially, because if you know they're already playing, then you have to provide a more comfortable facility and site for them to play, and hope that they return. I mean, most people want to be law-abiding citizens. If the majority of people in your state really want to be crooks, which I don't believe, then you start off at a disadvantage because there's no reason for them to want to play. I mean, again, with our ADW and our other things, I mean, Italy, I think, had the highest return rate. France was lower. Sweden was lower still. I mean, so you've had different levels of how much of the market they were able to capture. And there are things that we'll look at, but I mean, we won't resolve it today, because how we implement that system that you described would become important. I know that the Italians, when you sign up into the system, and it's actually proven to be a double-edged sword for them, but they put a system on you when you enroll. There's a blocking system that you agree to basically put in your computer. The problem that they found is that actually serves as a deterrent to a lot of people to want to put that system on the computer, because it potentially gives somebody a window into what you're doing and serves as a block. So that has it did prevent those people who took the block from playing, but it also caused a lot of people not to sign up in the Italian system. And I suspect from my last conversations with them, they may take that out because it actually has had a less than desirable effect for them in terms of, what they were trying to achieve in terms of blockage.
Inevitably, all the licensed operators, if they're going to be installing player protection systems, if they're going to be installing secure registration systems, will be at a competitive advantage, because it's so easy now to jump on any site. Any miner can jump on any site without any meaningful controls in place to gamble. And up in Canada, here's an example with British Columbia and Lotto Quebec a lot of Quebec isn't capturing the market they thought they would, because they have great controls over underage participation and this onerous registration process where you have to go through like an Equifax check, to all sorts of verifications and person verifications. Well, what they're finding is people are jumping on the site, starting the registration process, and quitting. They're saying, why do I need to do this? I can go to full tilt. It's wide open.
Okay. Well, no, I appreciate the thought. Mr. Anderson, any questions? Well, let me thank you guys. If you have time to stay around, we may have a question that comes back, but I'm going to ask if the other folk, Craig, Peter, Robert, Jack, and George, if you guys would all come forward at this time. Thank you so much for your...
You're welcome.
Take care.
Craig Fravel with the Del Mar Thoroughbred Club, Peter Tunney with Santa Anita, Robert Hartman with Golden Gate Fields, and Jack Owens with the Thoroughbred Owners, and George Foreman with the Morongo Band of Mission Indians. Let me get George and I don't know your name, sir. I apologize. I know I called you, but Pete, if you guys would just take the 2 seats up here, there are enough microphones that way you're not having to short back. So they're just the 2 of you here and the 3 of you there. And we got enough seats and we got enough microphones, so there's less going around. Let me start with Mr. Fravel from Del Mar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Craig Fravel. I'm the President and General Manager of the Del Mar Thoroughbred Club. I realize that racing interests in terms of attending some of these hearings, other than through our representatives and making presentations, are a little bit late to the party, but given that this is the last of the informational hearings that are scheduled, we wanted to make sure we got here and made ourselves available to you. The earlier speaker jumped in the way a little bit of my presentation. I wanted to remind this committee and the general public as well that internet gaming is not a new phenomenon in California. We have been conducting advanced deposit wagering or internet gaming under legislation that was adopted almost 10 years ago by the legislature, signed by Governor Davis, and under regulations adopted by the California Horse Racing Board for at least 10 years. And we have done that with relative success in terms of the ability to acquire new customers. For many years, early in its adoption, it was the fastest growing segment of our business, at times with growth rates in excess of 40% compared to more stagnant levels of wagering activity on track and at our existing brick and mortar facilities. But more importantly, the entire history of advanced deposit wagering in California has been done with little, if any, in the way of alleged or actual improprieties. We have had very great success working with our ADW companies, partners, some of which are owned by racetrack or racetrack entities, in making sure that adequate age protection requirements are met, that venue locations and tracking abilities are all in place. And I cannot name one incident of either an alleged or actual case of underage wagering in the horse racing business. This has been a major success story, and I think if you had law enforcement folks here and asked them if they'd had any negative experiences with internet wagering in California, you would find that there have been none. Having said that, the main reason we're here today is to, given that there are limited forms of legal wagering activities in the state of California, as you're aware, the tribal gaming interests, card clubs, the state lottery, and horse racing. And as one of those interests, and clearly as one of the only, or as the only legal form of online wagering currently, racing is here today merely to remind the committee that we are here, that if whatever form ultimately this business plan takes in terms of internet poker, if it indeed does pass, that racing would like to play a constructive role in formulating a role for us in that legislation. At this point, I can't tell you that, that at least from my company's standpoint, I think others, we have a specific idea of how that might take place. We have a lot of education to do, but we do want to be a part of this process. We want to be constructive players in it and make sure that our position in internet wagering is recognized throughout that process. With that, I'll turn that over to Mr. Owens.
Okay, why don't we? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Jack Owens. I'm an owner and breeder of thoroughbreds. That's a form of insanity that's incurable. It's typified by the sign that hangs in my barn. I used to have money, now I have horses. I am the chairman of the Thoroughbred Owners of California board. The legislature 20 years ago created an owners organization for this state. We are a statewide owners organization representing some 8,000 licensed owners. Collectively, we are the largest investor in horse racing in the state. As I defer to the track representatives that are here, but horse racing has a large footprint in California, just so that I'm sure you know this. We have 4 thoroughbred tracks, 8 racing fairs, 22 satellite wagering facilities, 16 on state fairgrounds, hundreds of breeding and training farms, $4 billion a year for the state's agribusiness, tourism, and entertainment economies. And we directly or indirectly employ more than 50,000 Californians. We are also a hallmark industry for the state. I came out of the wine business, and there are, I think there's some similarities that this is a calling card industry for the state, and it's something that I think needs to be viewed in that context. We attract a lot of tourism, especially with, when we have the Breeders' Cup in the state. His meat in particular is a real strong magnet for tourism into California, not to the exclusion of anybody else's meat, but it is a real pearl and something that I think should be protected or thought about in terms of how you deal with the problem that's in front of you. Without repeating what Craig was covering, horse racing wagering was the first legal betting allowed in California. We are currently the only legal form of internet wagering in the state, and internet wagering is a critical part of our business. If I get these numbers wrong, Craig or Peter can correct me. Handle in 2010 over $3 billion. ADW portion of that almost $700 million. And that has been growing. So to the extent that you look at the advanced deposit wagering aspect of our business, recognize that it's an increasing part of our overall operation. It's important, I think, as you address this problem, to take into account that you're dealing with an agricultural industry in large measure. We aren't just a gambling industry by any means. We have an infrastructure that relates very much to agricultural interests, and I think that's one of the powerfully positive parts of our industry. Yes, I know you're focusing on the gambling side of it, but as you focus on that, recognize that you have these sort of collateral effects that like waves in a pond, are going to spread out and affect a lot of other industries. This is not the first time that horse racing in this state has faced this. Forgive me if I'm telling you what you already know. We went through it with the lottery. We went through it with Indian gaming. Recognize that as an industry, we are competing nationally. We are competing with Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, Texas, Washington State. We're competing for fans, we're competing for bettors, we're competing for horses, we're competing for television time, we're competing for the entertainment dollar. So that it is important when you look at our industry to recognize that we haven't always been put on a level playing field. There are other states that have chosen to divert a portion of other revenue from gambling into the horse racing industry. I think because they were interested in preserving the kinds of things I'm talking about.
Let me do something.
Yes, sir.
And if I understood the gentleman from Del Mar, he would like, and if I'm mischaracterizing, please correct me, he would like to have the horse racing industry, a licensed gaming entity in California, considered as a part of whatever online system advances. Now, if I understand from the owner's standpoint, now you're not necessarily a licensed game provider. I mean, he is, you're not. You provide the horse, but he actually is a licensed game person. So do I understand that you would like a portion of the proceeds that would go to horses? I'm just trying to fast forward. Okay.
A rising tide lifts all yachts, if you like, or boats, or in our case, dinghies. Okay, but it benefits owners, the large group of owners in this state, to the extent that the industry itself succeeds. Okay, and we have many common interests in this area. This is clearly one. Okay, his purse structure, his handle, is very important to our business. Okay. We have other outlets. We can sell our horses. We're an export industry. The horses we breed, we sell overseas. Okay, we're in the export ag industry, among other things.
Right. Okay.
But our pathway to the market, if you would, is through the tracks, or the ADW providers, or the signals. Okay, that's
right.
So the return on our investment, whatever it may be, depends on the health of wagering in California, along with a lot of other.
But I mean, in the case of the ADW, a portion of that revenue comes to you for the horses. I mean, you guys clearly get a cut. What I'm trying to understand is that if we were looking at online gaming, there wouldn't be a horse involved in it because it'd be just people playing. Now, he might be a vendor and might take revenue from it, and if you and he had an agreement where you shared the revenue, I mean, as we would say in my neighborhood, my name is Paul, and that's between y'all. But if the two of you had an agreement between you that allowed you to share, then that would necessarily be a function of what we would do here. That would be a function.
Oh, absolutely right.
That would be an agreement that you would make with the tracks as to what they did with the proceeds that
Maybe. Yes, sir. I mean, there are all kinds of vehicles that are possible out there.
Okay.
I know this is not the place to talk about them.
That's okay. But I'm just trying to understand from the owner's standpoint. Then what you would like is to see the horse racing industry at the table, and then as a group, y'all would get together and figure it out how you divvied up what revenue you derive from the process.
I think that's a fair statement, sir. It doesn't mean that.
I just made it up, but it may not be true.
It doesn't mean that we might not take a look at perhaps the Horseman's own platform. Okay.
Okay. So you might then consider, depending upon the scheme that's adopted, then you might consider becoming yourself an applicant for a gaming license in California.
I can't as the TOC because we're a nonprofit operation, but I can see a possibility of
not necessarily the owners association. Yes. Because you couldn't do it as you would have to apply to justice and stand
Correct.
For a license and go through a licensing process.
An organization could. I'm not here to address that now, sir.
Okay. All right.
I'm just trying to say that we, I think, have a lot of beneficial effects on the economy in this state. And I'd like you to take those into account as you develop the concepts you're developing here. If I could give you a quick example, I hate to.
No, go ahead.
Right.
I'm just saying.
I think, in all deference, the legislature did a heck of a job last year in allowing us to compete. Okay, you recognized that we are competing with other jurisdictions that have slot-driven revenues and have other kinds of things. And you allowed us to deal with a change in our takeout procedure. The result was that we have significantly increased purses in California. It cost the state nothing, but it really helped this industry. Okay, we are, I think, in the beginning of a rebound. I think there's hope for this industry that derived from what you guys did, which I think was a smart move on your part, speaking for myself. And what I'm asking is, as you deal with this next issue, kindly don't shoot yourselves in the foot and undo some good that you did last year for a basically purely California industry with a lot of California employees, and I think a lot of benefits to the state. As Craig mentioned, also, I think we have a pretty good record of the way we have operated our gambling.
No, but remember two things. One, you're here today, and as they say in the thing, you have a seat at the table. And, you know, since I've chaired this committee, I mean, we revised the regulation as to how much came out that went to the fairs. We did the takeout. We've done exchange wagering. I mean, your industry is very well represented here in the state of California, and you know, and certainly your being here today at a discussion about online gaming indicates that, you know, we're certainly open to listen in terms of what makes the most practical sense. So that's where we are. So I hope you don't feel shut out. I have a horse racing establishment in my district that's in my town. The agricultural benefit, the jobs, how we deal with the trainers and the medicine, and how we apportion some of the proceeds to do that. I mean, this committee does that, so you understand. You're in the committee that actually does all of those things relative to horse racing, so we got that. The question that, to fast forward today, is whether or not, as the owners, you would want to participate, and you'd have to participate not as the owners as a group, but our licensing procedure would be for individuals and not the organization. And as well, if you participated with the track operators who are already licensed operators, so it would be a slightly less onerous process because they wouldn't be starting from scratch to get a license if you participated with them. I mean, however you chose to operate, I mean, we would recognize that, but that's kind of where we are today. So your view would be that you would like the horsing and horse racing industry considered as a potential beneficiary of the gaming revenue that would come from an internet platform.
Yes, sir.
Okay, got it. Let me don't leave. Let me go to the gentleman here in the houndstooth coat. And please introduce yourself, sir. And I omitted you, sir? Did I?
Yes.
Okay, go. I'm sorry. Let me go back to.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Robert Hartman, Golden Gate Fields. I would like to concur with what Mr. Fravel has already stated, and don't want to be repetitive and waste the committee's time. However, I do want to state that the industry stands united, the racetrack operators stand united, and we look forward to working with the chair and the committee on this issue.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Peter Tunney and Senator Anderson. Peter Tunney representing, along with Mr. Hartman, both Santa Anita and Golden Gate Field, owned by the same company, Magna. And we're here just to support the racing industry and echo the remarks made by Mr. Owens and Mr. Fravel. Thank you.
Okay, don't leave. Mr. Foreman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You can.
I think that although I don't know that there is consensus in the room, you've done a tremendous service in ventilating the issue and getting points of view out on the table, getting ideas out on the table, and I think we're farther along than we were a year ago, and I thank you for that. I just want to make a couple of points today, and the first is that we strongly think that a one-size-fits-all approach, that is to say lumping poker in with other forms of online game or gaming activity, is not a good idea. That poker is not the same as social games. Different games have different business models and regulatory needs. That the state has an opportunity to do it right on poker without negatively impacting consumer confidence and diminishing potential benefits to the state. One of the headings for today was public policy. California has had a consistent public policy that poker is and should continue to be regulated differently than other forms of gaming. Whatever regulation is developed should, as the DOJ representatives said today, not put the state in the hole, that it should be self-supporting financially. And that's, I think, easily done if the legislation is properly crafted. It doesn't take reinventing the wheel to essentially enlarge the scope of those already doing poker in California and licensed to do poker in California, to add a different form of playing the game. As you said a year ago, February, there are 3 ways to play poker in California legally, in a card club, in a tribal casino, or around a kitchen table. Adding a 4th online through one of those already legally entitled to operate poker in California would not be an expansion of gambling. It would not require invention of an entirely new regulatory regime. It would dramatically simplify the vetting process of potential operators, as the DOJ panel alluded to today. We think that those who are doing poker know poker and should be the ones to be doing poker. Those who have experience in other online forms of online wagering don't necessarily have the background and experience to run the poker part of the operation. And so although I think that there is potential in legislation that would authorize online poker in California to do something for the racing industry, making them a participant in the operation of online poker sites is not necessarily the way to go. Sure.
Are there any facilities in California that play poker exclusively?
No.
Exactly right. No is the answer.
That's right.
So, given that there is currently no one who plays poker exclusively, why would we limit, if we went online, beyond what we already provide for other people who do gaming in California, since there is no one who does poker exclusively? Whether it be a card club or an Indian casino, no one does anything exclusively. There is no place that only plays poker. Card clubs play California 21, they play Pai Gow, they play poker, they play other games. Now, it would be a choice, but there is no law that says that you can only play poker in California, right?
That is correct.
So, again, why would we create a limit to this type of game to take the same argument that you just made? Why would we limit this one when we don't limit any of the other ones who have a license to play any Class 2 game that's unbanked pursuant to the Constitution? Why would we limit this game as opposed to any other game that's played?
To reflect on what the Department of Justice panel indicated today, if they're estimating 18 to 24 months lead time to regulate poker, and I can't remember if it was they or other panelists today.
No, he said
advocated,
gaming. He didn't. He said gaming.
Okay. One of the other panelists advocated poker only. If you want to get a system up and running sooner rather than later, then you need a regulatory scheme that focuses on a particular game rather than an entire universe of games.
But the Department of Justice already regulates other games. They do that now.
Not online.
The 90-some-odd sites that have card clubs play other games that are Class 2. So the same regulatory scheme that they do at the Commerce Club, they could do with an online site. That wouldn't alter the workload for them to play. And they're still going to have to actually approve every game, including poker. Because now you're going into, once you start the game, they're going to have to determine that the operator of the game, the person providing the service, each game, including the poker games, are going to have to be regulated and specified anyway. So the workload isn't going to be altered, because even if it's a poker game, it's still going to have to be approved on a game-by-game, operator-by-operator basis anyway.
And for every game involved, there's an additional set of regulations, an additional time taken to develop those, additional staffing.
No, not so. In the online format, Mr. Foreman, because one operator may function differently than another operator, you will literally have to take every game and identify it for every site that's played with the operator who plays. So that there will be no thing called poker that's blanketly approved. You'd actually have to approve the specific game by the specific operator with the specific electronics being done. There is no thing that would be called poker that would be approved out of hand. That's not how the internet platform works. So the game that's being played would have to be determined to be legal in California, and you'd have to approve every game anyway. Even if you called it poker, the mechanics of that game would have to be approved, and they'd have to do the same amount of work anyway.
There is no question with respect to the legality of poker. There remain questions about the legality of certain other games being played.
Right, but again, the legality of poker, should you play online, would have to be determined by justice to be fair and above board.
Sure.
So I'm just saying, so there is no extension of time, because every game would have to be approved anyway by the specific operator. So there's absolutely, you're flat wrong. There's no extension of time, because they'll have to approve every game by every operator in justice to make sure that the game is fair and operates. Unless all the operators took the exact same platform. If everybody, as someone mentioned, said, this is the architecture that you play in California, and everyone played the same game, then you'd be right. But I'm not certain that that's what we would do anyway. There probably would be more than one operator, and there'd be more than one approach, and we probably would have multiple architectures. Therefore, you'd still end up having to have every game approved. Even if you had variations of poker, if you change the game from 5-card stud to Texas Hold'em, now you've got to approve that game individually. So there's no blanket thing that says because you called it poker, you get to play it. That's not true. Even when you alter the course of a game in a card club, you still have to go back to justice and get that game approved. So I'm not certain that, given that you're going to have to do that anyway, every game will have to be approved by justice. There is nothing that gets approved called poker out of hand. That's just flat wrong. You'll have to approve every game, every system, by every operator. So that's what you'll have to do anyway.
Well, we will agree to disagree.
Tell me what's different.
I think that it will be quantitatively and qualitatively more burdensome for the department to move beyond the universe of games which are generally acknowledged to be poker. And when you get into other games,
they
you
already
raise
do
different
that.
issues.
They do Pai-Gow here, so they have experience in Pai-Gow right now, don't they? So if someone were going to go Pai-Gow, again, assuming that you could make it unbanked and a Class 3 game, the same Justice Department people regulate Pai-Gow. They regulate California 21 right now. So all you're talking about is how you do the game. In online format, they would also have to make sure that the platform that it was provided on was fair. Just as they do with the advanced deposit wagering, you have to make sure that the mechanics of the game, not just the horse race, so there are a number of things that they already have to do in the advanced deposit game that they already play. The electronics become a part of how you measure the game. So it's no longer simply the card game where a person's dealing. The electronics become more important. One of the big scandals in online gaming was the tribe that was cheating people in Canada because they rigged the computer. So there are a number of things that they'd have to check anyway. So the regulatory format that you described isn't true. It would be convenient for you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you save them any money or time.
I guess we'll just have to see.
Okay. And again, and the person who would approve every game, in my view, irrespective of the mechanism that you play, would be the fellow from justice. The operator, the mechanics, the electronics, to make sure that all of it fit. Irrespective of what you called it, you'd have to make sure that the mechanics fit and that it was legal under California law and that the person playing wasn't being cheated. Those become the regulatory issues that he would look at. What you call the game is completely irrelevant to the guy at Justice who's going to regulate it.
Well, I'm less hung up on the name of the game than I am on the substance of the game. And so we'll, I suspect, be having additional dialogue with the Justice Department on that question. But just to wrap it up, from our perspective, it makes sense to focus on enabling those already in the business, being able to do this form of gaming, to do it in a way that protects California consumers, make sure the state's interest is adequately protected, the revenue as well as regulatory, and to do it in a way that is, for those engaged in the business, predictable, which means that not having a reopener of the whole terms of the deal in 4 years or 5 years, but having something that's predictable over time where investments can be recovered and marketing can be successful and not have to worry about having the rug pulled out from under an operator after only a few years when it's going to take a long time, at least according to Justice, just to get up and running. Anyway, I thank you for the time and attention.
I appreciate that. Let me go back. The 5 year is a time that you have that's a review. And it doesn't say that the rug gets pulled. It says that there's a review and you start off with an exclusive right to continue. It doesn't say that the process gets rebid. So there you're just flat wrong. Secondly, let's go back to the other dynamic that you raised. You raised that you want people who are already in the business. Did Justice look at the background and do the kind of checks on the equity for your tribe when you got a compact?
For the tribal government, no.
Of course not. So that means that when you applied, you too would have to go to Justice and submit the people who are going to be the operators of the game because there is no license for you to do poker. You operate a compact, and that's the part of your business that they regulate. You're not regulated to do poker in California because that's not what we regulated for you. Your license to Justice would be just like his license to Justice, so you too would have to submit your people, submit all the documents, and go through the same background check because you haven't done that either as a tribal government. You've done that through IGRA, and that's perfectly legitimate, and they inspect your slot machines, but they don't have anything to do with your poker game. Isn't that correct?
The Gambling Control Commission does not. The National Indian Gaming Commission does, and each tribe's gaming commission does. Okay. So there are multiple levels of regulation, multiple levels of background investigation.
Does the Justice Department give you a license to play poker in California?
No.
So that means that if we're going into poker, to take the analogy that you just laid down, you too would have to get a license to play poker as a separate entity from the tribal government.
If a tribe were to seek licensure to do internet poker directly as a tribe, I would agree with you. What has been proposed is something in SB 40 anyway, is something different than that, which is that it would be an entity, not a tribe, but a business entity of which tribes may comprise a member of that entity.
But hold it right there. But the entity doesn't have a license.
No, the entity would have to get one.
So the idea that you just made then is bogus because you would not save the time because that entity would have to go through the same licensing process that everyone else does.
But if the entity is made up of individuals or entities that have already been licensed by the state, that are governments, that would not be subject to that sort of investigation, then it wouldn't be a major delay.
It would be the same licensing process that anyone else who's a new applicant to play poker would have to do. You would effectively, I mean, again, the distinction that I'm making is that if the 81 or whatever card clubs applied, they have licenses to play poker in California. Your 60 whatever compacted tribes do not. So you would have to not only create a business entity that allowed you to play, but then you would have to submit yourself to the same investigatory background that the fellow from Justice was describing. because you don't have a license to do that here. You have a compact, and the compact specifies what you're doing, but there was no background check, there was no audit done, there was no accounting procedure done. None of that was done by you. Isn't that correct?
Actually, the state has audited. The NIGC has audited.
We audit the slot machine revenue from your business.
Tribal gaming agencies have audited. So there are 3 levels of audits. The CGCC audits are not limited to slot machines. They look at the entire operation. They look at internal controls. They look at audits. They get the audit that is done, that is sent to the federal government. So there is state oversight even as to the Class 2 activities when they look at the casino as a whole. But that's, I suspect this is a conversation better had on another day.
Okay. All right. Any questions from the audience?
I just have a question, Senator. Josh Panay on behalf of the Morongo Band of Mission Indians. Just following on your questions to Mr. Foreman and the issue you're trying to get, I'd just like to understand it a little better. Number one, it sounds like you're talking about all games in the universe, so there should not be a limit on games. Is that correct?
No. All games would have to be approved by the Justice Department, provided they were legal pursuant to the California Constitution.
Okay. So you've spoken at other hearings before about these social games. Are you referring to those types of games?
I'm talking about any game that is legal pursuant to the California Constitution that would be approved by the Justice Department.
So we've talked about warlords and warlocks.
Any game that would be approved by the Justice Department and is legal pursuant to the California Constitution.
Buttons.
I have no idea what it is. It would be any game that is legal pursuant to the California Constitution. That would be a game that would be eligible to be taken up.
So those games that are played in card rooms today are all legal, I assume. Maybe some are, some aren't.
If they aren't, the justice people do that.
If they've been approved by justice.
Right.
So you're advocating, and that's what we've been trying to understand, you're advocating in your legislation this concept of any game that's that justice could deem approved under the Constitution and the statutes of this state.
Right. You could not play casino or Class 3 games because they're illegal.
And you understand, at least on the Morongo tribal government's viewpoint, that going beyond what is existing today in the state that is being played, that's an issue for the Morongo tribal government in that it could move into another territory beyond what in Indian country is called Class 2. In the state is traditionally called games of skill or poker.
I agree.
So
but I mean, you could not play a game that would violate the Constitution, and the legislature doesn't have the authority to grant a game that's prohibited by the Constitution. So if the Constitution doesn't allow it, then absent a vote of the people, we couldn't permit it. Justice couldn't even investigate it because they would say this game violates the law. But any game that would be played, for example, when Pai-Gow was taken up at card clubs, that, from what I understand in talking to people at Justice, took them several months of review to determine how you could play Pai-Gow in an unbanked legal fashion in California. They worked it out to the satisfaction of everyone, and then the game was played. But that review had to be done by Justice before the game could be implemented at a California club, along with all of the other games that they played. So this would not be a blanket thing to say you can come in and play any game you want to play. That game would have to be approved and legal pursuant to the Constitution, which is very explicit as to what you can play.
Okay. Well, thank you, Senator.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Park Terry, representing the Poker Players Alliance. I'll be very brief. I wasn't intending to speak, but I think there were a couple of very important points made today that lead me to think that the committee really should be considering an inclusionary business model for this system rather than an exclusionary model, because I think the deeper you get into exclusionary models, I think many of the points that were brought out today about the legal difficulties, the practical difficulties of doing that start to make it very difficult.
Now, the inclusion, you're talking about the people who are currently playing in California, and we deem it not necessarily illegal, but certainly unscrupulous.
Right. As we've testified before, the players would like as many sites as possible to play on.
Right.
And we think bringing those sites in under the tent as a business model makes more sense than trying to exclude them. And I think that's...
I mean, but we've had this discussion before. You know, there are a number of people who are legitimate operators, and some of them might well end up being partnered with, whether it be some of our Indian tribes or the other people who play. I just, again, it's my view, and I may lose the view. I think people who have played in the post-Ouija period should not be eligible to play. You believe that they should. We just disagree. I'm not prepared to allow anyone who has continued to play post-Ouija to be eligible to bid, period. I mean, I don't have another way to say it, but I mean, if that entity didn't wish to follow what was the intent of U.S. law and they chose to play, then in my view, they should not be allowed to play in California.
Well, and I think that, again, raises the problem of, since I think there's general consensus that those sites probably have about 80% of the players, we're back to this notion of
But today they have them all because they're the only ones who play. They got 100%. And the idea would be that most people would want to obey the law and would want to move to one of the legal sites. And I'm just saying, there are probably 8 or 10, you know, there might be a few more here and there, but there are probably 8 or 10 sites or companies who could operate the kind of game that we would want in California. I'm going to bet that most of them would want to partner or create a relationship with one of the people who's already doing business in California, because it would probably be the practical way for them to move forward. I'm just saying that those people who've been playing illegally or unethically at a minimum should not be allowed to play when other people attempted to follow American law. And if people chose to do that, then we would prosecute them if they played on those sites, because we would make it clear that it's illegal to play on a site that's not authorized by the state of California. And those people would be prosecuted, and we would also attempt to prosecute the people who played against California law.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, can I make just one more point on this, and I'll leave it to your discretion. But the ADW, I think, is another interesting model for this.
Right.
It is an inclusionary system. In other words, there's no limitation on the number of entities that the California Horse Racing Board can license as ADW hubs.
Right.
They face some of the same problems, in theory, that poker would face, and that there are offshore sites, probably, that take bets on horse racing that aren't part of the California license system, and yet many players have signed up for ADW accounts in California.
But hold your point. Even the sites that do advanced deposit wagering, there are several that actually operate in California and operate in Europe. They don't blend their games. They're very cognizant of recognizing California law. Should they change, their licenses would be snatched. The people who operate games in Europe who operate here don't bring the European game here because that would be illegal. They understand that, and they function by our law. Now, could they get away with it? Probably. But if they did, we would probably pull their license. Not because they necessarily violated a law, but because they chose to do something that was unethical. We have a responsibility to set a standard for what we perceive to be the ethical operation, even if it's not illegal. That would be what that background check would entail. So if justice concluded that you violated Ouija, then we would say you can't play, Now, if you didn't violate your Ouija, I agree with you. You want to have a platform that's open, and as we discussed, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, you don't want to end up running into a violation of the Commerce Clause and other things because you try to ring fence it too narrowly. But by the same token, you don't want to reward people for effectively gaming a system that everybody else tried to follow. And most of the people who were the legitimate sites when Ouija was passed actually shut down and stopped doing business. There'll be enough people to provide the games that we need where we don't have to take the people who've been violating the law, or at least violating the spirit of what was intended.
Okay.
But, thank you.
Senator Wright, Reverend James Butler from the California Coalition Against Gambling Expansion. First, thank you for holding these hearings. I'm learning something new every time I attend. I'm wondering if I might be allowed to direct a question to one of the members of the Department of Justice and also Mr. Horbay.
Well, let me. Is someone from Justice still here? Mr. Horbay is still in the back. We can rig that up if that without objection from Justice. Okay. Give me just a second for them.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
First, to Mr. Horbay, on the approach that you use called the central market access controls, the last one, is it possible to set up that sort of a monitoring system? Monitoring system, is that a fair estimation of wording? Whatever system you want to call it. Is it possible to set up that kind of system without having legalized internet gambling?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you. And then the second, to the Department of Justice, and it seems, I know there's kind of some debate still, but if it's possible to enforce a standard whereby no one is capable, using Mr. Horbay's approach, to access an illegal site and thus play illegally, if we can do it in the future, why can't we, and why aren't we not doing it now?
Mr. Horbay's presentation and software is an interesting aspect, but it's an area that I think needs more exploration, whether that can actually physically or feasibly be done without violating the existing Constitution here in the United States. So that question, regardless of whether it's a legalized system or remains illegal, would still have to be determined by a legal analysis.
If I might. And there's, as far as your department's concerned, is there any other way to enforce the prohibition against internet gambling here in California that's available to you that you can use now?
The current methods that would be in place for any enforcement of internet gambling would need to be a joint federal and state law enforcement effort to investigate illegal internet gambling websites that are offering wagers to California citizens. Further steps would need to be made to actually implement a statute here in California that specifically makes internet gambling illegal here in the state of California, similar to what the state of Washington has done. The Bureau has gone through preliminary steps to develop a legislative proposal to draft language for a statute of that nature. However, it's still in the legislative proposal stage.
Thank you, Senator Wright. I would certainly hope that that might be passed even before we legalize it, that we make it prohibited and then pursue there. Thank you very much.
That might be all we get. Let me say we're going to look, and Reverend Butler will contact you next day or so. We may try to convene to deal with problem gambling and the people who are in your organization who don't think we should have any gambling at all.
Thank you.
And that might be our concluding hearing on the subject. There being nothing further, let me thank everyone for coming. I hope that the discussion was worth your time. And for all the witnesses who came and traveled, I appreciate your effort to help us get more enlightened. We're adjourned.